She thought no one would notice her tears until a stranger whispered, "I'm here for you." When tears fall in silence, the rain drummed against the windows of the small downtown cafe, like fingers tapping impatiently on glass. Celeste sat hunched over her untouched latte, watching the foam slowly dissolve into brown swirls. Stared back from the dark window, mascara smudged beneath. Red-rimmed eyes that had cried too much over the past 3 days. The breakup text still glowed on her phone screen. "I think we need space. This isn't working anymore." 7 years of shared dreams, inside jokes, and whispered promises reduced to a handful of cold words sent at 2:17 a.m. She had read it over and over, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that hurt less. Around her, the cafe buzzed with the comfortable chatter of evening customers. A couple shared dessert at the corner table, feeding each other bites of chocolate cake with the easy intimacy she once knew. College students huddled over textbooks, their futures spread before them like blank pages waiting to be written. Everyone seemed to know where they belonged, except her. Celeste pressed her palms against her cheeks, trying to stop the fresh wave of tears that threatened to spill. She had chosen this public place deliberately, thinking the presence of strangers would force her to keep her composure. But grief had its own schedule, and it didn't care about social conventions. The barista, a young woman with kind eyes and purple-streaked hair, had been casting concerned glances her way for the past hour. Celeste could feel the weight of that gentle attention. But she wasn't ready for questions or comfort from someone who couldn't possibly understand. How do you explain that your entire future just evaporated? That the person you thought you'd grow old with decided you weren't worth fighting for? She fumbled in her purse for tissues, her hands shaking slightly. The simple act of wiping her nose felt monumental, like climbing a mountain when you could barely stand. Every breath was deliberate, every moment a conscious choice to keep existing. When everything inside screamed to just disappear, the cafe door chimed as someone entered, bringing with them the scent of rain and autumn leaves. Celeste didn't look up. She had perfected the art of making herself invisible, shrinking into corners where grief could consume her without an audience. But sometimes, even when we try to hide, someone sees us anyway. Leo had been having his own difficult evening. The architecture firm where he worked had just lost their biggest client, and 3 years of careful planning had crumbled in a single phone call. He'd walked the rain-soaked streets for hours, trying to make sense of how quickly solid ground could turn to quicksand beneath your feet. The warm glow of the cafe had drawn him in like a lighthouse beacon. He'd planned to order coffee and lose himself in sketches, the way he always did when life felt too complicated for words. But as he waited in line, his attention was caught by the woman sitting alone by the window. She was trying so hard to be invisible. Shoulders curved inward, as if she could fold herself small enough to disappear entirely. Her dark hair fell like a curtain around her face, but he could see the tremor in her hands as she reached for her cup. The way she held her breath between sips, as if breathing itself had become a conscious effort. Leo recognized that particular kind of pain. He'd worn it himself not so long ago when his engagement had ended, and he'd found himself starting over at 32, wondering if he'd ever feel whole again. There was something about witnessing another person's raw vulnerability that called to the wounded healer in all of us. He ordered 2 coffees and a slice of the cafe's famous cinnamon coffee cake, the kind his grandmother used to make when the world felt too heavy to bear. The barista gave him a questioning look when he asked for an extra fork. But something in his expression must have conveyed his intentions, because she simply nodded and added, "Extra napkins to the bag." Approaching someone in distress required delicacy. Leo had learned this lesson the hard way, understanding that good intentions could feel like intrusions when someone was drowning in their own sorrow. I set the coffee and cake on the empty chair across from Celeste, not sitting down, not demanding. Acknowledgement. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't help but notice you might need some company, or at least some coffee that's actually warm." Celeste looked up, startled. Through her tears, she saw a tall man with gentle brown eyes and dark hair slightly mussed by the rain. He wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, Nothing remarkable except for the genuine concern etched across his features. There was no pity in his expression, no awkward discomfort at her obvious distress, just quiet understanding. I don't usually approach strangers, Leo continued, his hands tucked safely in his pockets to show he meant no harm. But sometimes we all need someone to remind us we're not as alone as we feel. I'm Leo, and I've been exactly where you are right now. Something in his tone, perhaps the lack of false cheerfulness or empty platitudes, made Celeste's defensive walls crack slightly. Celeste, she managed, her voice hoarse from crying. Would you mind if I sat down, Celeste? No pressure to talk. No judgment about the tears. Sometimes it just helps to have someone nearby who gets it. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Leo settled into the chair across from her, pushing the fresh coffee toward her hands. The warmth seeped through the ceramic, grounding her to the present moment. 7 years, she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. 7 years, and he ended it with a text message. Leo's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Text message breakups should be illegal, he said quietly. They're the coward's way out of something that deserves at least the dignity of a real conversation. The validation of her anger felt like cool water on a burn. Everyone keeps telling me I'm better off without him, that I deserve better. But right now, better feels impossible to imagine. Right now is just right now, Leo replied, breaking off a piece of coffee cake and offering it to her. It's not forever, even though it feels like it might be. I know that sounds like fortune cookie wisdom, but I've learned it's true. Celeste accepted the cake, surprised to find she had any appetite at all. The cinnamon melted on her tongue, sweet and comforting in a way that reminded her of childhood, of times when a scraped knee was the worst pain imaginable. What happened to you? She asked, then immediately looked stricken. I'm sorry, that's too personal. You don't have to. Okay, Leo assured her. My fiancée decided she'd rather marry her yoga instructor 3 weeks before our wedding. Left me with a paid-for venue, 200 disappointed guests, a very expensive dress hanging in a closet I couldn't bear to open for months. Despite everything, Celeste felt a small smile tug at the corner of her mouth. A yoga instructor? That's almost too cliché to be real, right? I couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry, so I did both. Spent a lot of time sitting in places like this, wondering how I'd completely misjudged someone I thought I knew better than myself. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sharing the cake and watching the rain streak down the windows. Other customers came and went, but their corner felt suspended in time. Small pocket of understanding in a world that often felt impossibly harsh. Do you ever wonder if you're just fundamentally unlovable? Celeste asked suddenly. It's like maybe there's something broken in you that drives people away. Leo considered the question seriously, not rushing to offer empty reassurance. I used to think that. Spent months dissecting every conversation, every gesture, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. But then I realized I was giving myself way too much credit for someone else's choices. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting hers across the small table. Here's what I learned, and it might sound harsh at first, but stay with me. Sometimes people leave not because we're not enough, but because they're not ready for what we have to offer. That's not our failing, Celeste. That's theirs. The words hit her like a gentle wave, washing over defenses she didn't realize she'd built. But how do you trust again after something like this? How do you open your heart when you know it can be shattered so easily? Very carefully, Leo admitted with a rueful smile. And with the right person, who understands that hearts are precious things that should be handled with care. As if to emphasize his point, he reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his. The contact was brief, respectful, but it carried a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. I have a theory, he continued, releasing her. Hand before the gesture could feel presumptuous. I think the universe puts us through these devastating experiences not to break us, but to prepare us for something better. To teach us what real love looks like, so we recognize it when it finally shows up. Celeste found herself truly looking at him for the first time that evening. Leo had a face that spoke of someone who had weathered storms and emerged gentler for the experience. There were laugh lines around his eyes, evidence of joy that had survived disappointment. His hands, she noticed, were those of someone who created things. With faint pencil stains on his fingers and a small scar across one knuckle. "What do you do?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Besides rescuing crying women in coffee shops?" He laughed, a sound that was warm and unguarded. "I'm an architect. I design spaces where people can feel safe and happy." Ironic, considering I couldn't. "Design a relationship that lasted, but we all have our blind spots." "I'm a teacher," Celeste shared. "Third grade. I spend my days helping 80-year-olds learn to read and solve problems, but apparently I can't figure out when my own relationship is falling apart." "Kids are lucky to have you," Leo said with conviction. "I bet you're the kind of teacher they remember forever, the one who made them feel seen and valued." The sincerity in his voice made fresh tears spring to her eyes, but these felt different somehow, less like grief and more like relief. "Thank you," she whispered, "for sitting with me, for the cake, for not trying to fix everything with empty words." "Thank you for letting me stay," he replied. "Sometimes being the comforter helps heal the comforter too." Outside, the rain had slowed to a gentle patter, and the cafe was beginning to empty as evening deepened into night. But neither Leo nor Celeste seemed ready to leave their small sanctuary, this bubble of unexpected understanding they'd created together. "Would you like to walk?" Leo asked as they finished the last of the cake. "I know a place that's beautiful in the rain, if you don't mind getting a little wet." Celeste looked down at her tear-stained clothes, her smudged makeup, her complete lack of preparedness for anything resembling a normal evening. Then she looked at Leo, this stranger who had seen her at her absolute worst and chosen to stay anyway. "Like that," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. As they gathered their things and prepared to step back into the world beyond the cafe's warm windows, Celeste felt something shift inside her chest. The pain was still there, would probably be there for a while yet. But alongside it, for the first time in days, was something that felt almost like hope. Leo held the door open for her. And as they stepped out into the gentle rain together, Celeste realized that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings arise from the ashes of the most devastating endings. She didn't know where this unexpected connection might lead, but for the first time in 3 days, she was curious enough about the future to want to find out. The healing touch of understanding the rain had transformed the city into something magical. Streetlights reflected in puddles like scattered stars, and the usual harsh edges of downtown had softened into impressionist paintings. Leo led Celeste through quiet side streets, their footsteps echoing softly on wet pavement as they walked without destination, simply moving through the healing rhythm of shared motion. "There's something about rain that makes everything feel possible again," Leo said, tilting his face up to catch the gentle drops. "Like the world is washing itself clean, getting ready for something new." Celeste pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, but she wasn't cold. If anything, she felt more awake than she had in months. "I used to hate the rain. It always seemed so melancholy, like the sky was crying along with everyone's disappointments. And now?" She considered this as they paused at a small bridge overlooking a canal that ran through the heart of the city. The water below moved lazily, carrying fallen leaves like tiny boats on an unhurried journey to somewhere else. "Now it feels like permission," she said finally. "Permission to let things go, to start over, to be someone different than I was yesterday." Leo leaned against the bridge railing, studying her profile in the amber glow of the street lamps. "Do you want to be?" It was such a simple question, but it stopped Celeste in her tracks. When was the last time anyone had asked her what she wanted, rather than what she should do or how she should feel? "Braver," she said without hesitation. "I want to be someone who doesn't disappear into other people's expectations. Someone who takes up space instead of apologizing for existing." "Tell me about disappearing," Leo said gently. "I have a feeling you've been practicing that particular magic trick for a while." Celeste gripped the bridge railing, her knuckles white against the metal. "You know that feeling when you're so busy being what someone else needs that you forget who you actually are?" I spent 7 years molding myself into whatever version of Celeste would make him happy. Quieter when he needed peace, more social when he wanted to show me off, more independent when he felt crowded. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The irony is that none of it mattered. He left anyway, and now I'm sitting here realizing I don't even know what I like anymore. What movies I actually enjoy, what food tastes good to me, what I want to do on a Saturday morning when no one else's preferences matter. Leo nodded with the recognition of someone who had walked a similar path. After my engagement ended, I spent weeks wandering around my apartment like I was visiting someone else's life. Everything in it had been chosen by committee, compromised, until it satisfied no one completely. What did you do? I got rid of almost everything, he admitted. Kept only the things that made me smile when I looked at them. Started over with just the essentials and added things back slowly, only if they felt genuinely mine.
Ow.
They resumed walking, turning down a tree-lined street where Victorian houses stood like silent witnesses to countless other stories of love and loss and renewal. The rain had stopped, but the air still held that clean wash smell that spoke of fresh beginnings. "Can I ask you something that might sound strange?" Celeste said as they passed under a canopy of oak trees whose leaves rustled with residual raindrops. "After the evening we've had, I think strange is relative." "Why did you stay in the cafe, I mean? You could have just gotten your coffee and left, pretended you didn't see me falling apart. Most people would have." Leo slowed his pace, giving the question the consideration it deserved. "'Cause 6 months ago, I was the one falling apart in a public place. A diner, actually, at 2 in the morning after I'd spent the entire day returning wedding gifts and canceling vendors." He paused beneath a street lamp, his features thoughtful in the golden light. "This elderly woman at the next table saw me, crying into my coffee, and came over. She didn't say much, just sat with me and shared her piece of pie. Told me about losing her husband of 40 years and how she'd learned that grief shared is grief lessened. Did it help? More than I can express. She probably saved my life that night, though she'll never know it. Sometimes we need someone to witness our pain, to confirm that what we're feeling is real and valid and human." Celeste felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I've been so angry at myself for crying in public, for not being stronger." "Strength isn't about not breaking," Leo said firmly. "It's about being willing to be seen while you're broken and trusting that healing is possible." They found themselves in a small park where benches surrounded a fountain that had been turned off for the season. Leo brushed rainwater from one of the benches and gestured for Celeste to sit. The silence that settled between them felt comfortable now, like a warm blanket rather than an awkward void. "Tell me about teaching," Leo said eventually. "What made you choose kids?" Celeste's face lit up for the first time all evening. "You ever watched a child discover they can read? It's that moment when the squiggles on a page suddenly become words, and words become stories, and stories become doorways to everywhere?" She turned to face him on the bench, her passion evident in every gesture. "That's pure magic. These little humans who come to me convinced they're not smart enough or good enough, and by the end of the year they're reading chapter books and writing their own stories and seeing themselves as capable of anything. It sounds like you're not just teaching them to read, you're teaching them to believe in themselves." Exactly. Somehow, I forgot to apply those lessons to my own life. I'd tell my students that mistakes are just learning opportunities, that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions, that they're enough exactly as they are. She shook her head ruefully, and then I'd go home and twist myself into not trying to earn love from someone who'd already decided I wasn't worth the effort. Leo reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small sketchbook, its pages warped slightly from the evening's moisture. He flipped to a blank page and began drawing with quick, sure strokes. "What are you doing?" Celeste asked, leaning closer. "To see." "Drawing what I see when I look at you," he said simply. Under his pencil, her face emerged on the page, but it wasn't quite her as she knew herself. This version had clearer eyes, a straighter spine, a suggestion of strength in the set, of her shoulders that she didn't recognize. "That's not me," she protested softly. "It's you without the weight of someone else's judgment," Leo corrected. "It's who you are when you talk about your students, when you get excited about something you care about. This is the woman who shapes young minds and changes lives every single day." Celeste stared at the drawing, seeing herself through his eyes. "How do you see all that when I feel so broken? 'Cause broken doesn't mean worthless. Some of the most beautiful things in the world have cracks in them." He closed the sketchbook and tucked it away. "Besides, I think you're much less broken than you believe." Hurt, yes. Disappointed, absolutely. But your core, the essential you, that's still intact. A comfortable silence fell between them again, but this time it felt full rather than empty. Celeste found herself studying Leo's profile, noting the way he listened with his whole body, the patient stillness of someone accustomed to observing and understanding. "Can I ask what happened to the woman who left you for her yoga instructor?" Leo smiled wryly. "She married him 2 months later in what I'm told was a very flexible ceremony." Despite everything, Celeste burst into laughter. "You did not just make a yoga pun about your ex-fiancé's wedding. Too soon?" "Probably, but I needed the laugh." She wiped tears from her eyes, but these were different tears, cleaner somehow. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she hadn't left?" I used to torture myself with that question, but honestly, I think I would have spent my life trying to be enough for someone who was fundamentally wrong for me. Sometimes the thing that feels like the worst thing that could happen turns out to be the thing that saves us from a life that was never really ours to begin with. They sat in comfortable contemplation, watching the occasional car pass by and listening to the gentle drip of water from the trees above them. The night had fully arrived, but neither seemed ready for this unexpected evening to end. "Leo," Celeste said eventually, her voice soft with something that might have been hope. "Yes. Would you like to have coffee again sometime? When I'm not?" A complete emotional disaster. He turned to look at her fully, his brown eyes warm with something that made her heart flutter in a way it hadn't in years. "I would love that. But for the record, you weren't a disaster tonight. You were beautifully, courageously human." As they exchanged phone numbers and made tentative plans to meet again, Celeste realized that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can reshape the entire landscape of our lives. She had walked into that cafe convinced she was broken beyond repair, and she was leaving with the radical possibility that maybe, just maybe, her story was just beginning. The walk back to their cars was quiet but charged with potential. When they reached the parking garage where Celeste had left her car hours earlier, they lingered by the entrance, neither quite ready to let the evening end. "Thank you," she said finally, "for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for staying when you could have left, for reminding me that kindness from strangers isn't extinct." "Thank you for letting me stay," Leo replied, "for trusting me with your story, for showing me that healing doesn't always have to be a solo journey." As they parted ways, Celeste sat in her car for a long moment before starting the engine. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed the same face she'd seen that morning, but somehow it looked different now. The eyes held a spark that hadn't been there in months, and the smile that played at the corners of her mouth felt genuine rather than performed. She thought about her empty apartment, about the silence that would greet her when she opened the door. But for the first time since the breakup, that silence didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like space, blank and full of possibility, waiting for her to decide what to fill it with. As she drove through the quiet streets toward home, Celeste found herself already looking forward to tomorrow. To the phone call she might make, to the coffee date that might lead to something beautiful and unexpected. She had entered the evening, convinced that her story was ending, but now she understood that sometimes what feels like an ending is actually just the turn of a page. The rain had stopped completely, and stars were beginning to appear between the parting clouds, as if the universe itself was offering its blessing on whatever was beginning to bloom between two hearts that had learned, through disappointment and grace, how to hope again.